Hello. I'm Sarah. I worked at Consensys for 2 years. I'm no longer at Consensys. I do independent contracting work with various different startups, mostly in the US, some in Europe. Uh, Prior to my time at Consensys, I guess maybe a company you guys might be familiar with is Deliveroo. It's like in the US we don't have it, but it's a Europe-based food delivery service. So I think most of the things I'll share today are probably like based on my time at Consensys, but since Deliveroo was also like a high growth tech startup that I worked in, and I've worked in others, I wanted to kind of bring in some themes that I've seen across a bunch of different high growth tech startups and see what you guys think and maybe spark some discussion. So I didn't make a presentation because I wanted to spend more time answering questions and sort of getting into topics. But yeah, I'll bring up, I guess, three main themes that I've seen, and the themes come from working across tech startups, and actually interviewed quite a lot of ex-Consensys employees and current Consensys employees to see what they thought, and got some really interesting themes. So the first thing I want to talk about is like how important language is that I've seen in how businesses grow and scale. From my time at Deliveroo through Consensys, so many conversations were about growth and scale, like faster, faster, faster. And what I saw was, or like what I was trying to do, and I found to be very successful, is instead of using words like growth and scale, think about replication and sort of creating feedback loops. So something that was a main challenge that I was looking at Deliveroo was they were just trying to grow and scale across many, many, many different markets. And I asked the question, well, why are you going into this market? And they were like, well, because we're growing and we're scaling. I was like, okay, well, why? Right? So instead of grow and scale, I helped them to look at, okay, what if we think about a word like replication? So what are the markets we're currently in? Which ones are doing well? What do we want to recreate, right? And where can we look for those markets around the world? And then kind of worked with them to create growth plans through replicating what we were already doing well, and then creating the feedback loops and understanding what we were doing well to then apply them to new markets. So we didn't have to reinvent the wheel every time. So that was an approach to growth and scale. At Consensys, I think, Consensys was like a collection of startups. So everybody was like running, building and growing. But I think a big challenge was sort of sharing knowledge across teams. A lot of times, like one team would be really good at, have a really strong hiring practice, for example, or you say interview process, but no one else in the organization would know about it. They may have it hiding in some document somewhere, but people wouldn't know. So something I worked on at Consensys was creating what I called community of practice, where we created a space of learning for people. I would say, I don't know if the term is, I don't want to throw out terms that confuse people, but the people who would work on like the internal processes and systems in their team, I called them like the OD or org design people, and they could be anyone. It could be a technical person, it could be a business development person, just someone who is passionate about looking at how their team was working. So I got those people together and created sort of learning environments around, let's talk about like trends in self-organizing, let's talk about improving skills that are important for working in a decentralized remote first team, like listening and communication and all that kind of stuff. So created a community of practice through similar interests and similar areas of learning. And then what ended up happening, which was really great and is still working out well, is those teams are sharing each other's practices. So, and another sort of benefit from that is that those people are able to build relationships with one another and sort of create like a cross-team sort of coaching relationship. So instead of just being stuck in your own team, working through challenges, I could go to you, for example, if you're in another team and you're playing the same sort of role, and we can work together to co-solve our challenges. So that was one thing. The next is, which one should I talk about first? I would say a big thing that came up interviewing all of the people at Consensys, hands down, everyone said decision making. And I'm sure this is a topic that's going to come up a lot in decentralized governance conversations. But something I wanted to touch on is how everybody says, oh, we need better ways of making decisions across 3 people, 5 people, 50 people, and here are all these amazing tools. But nobody really seems to know where to start, right? So I can talk about what's worked for the teams that I've worked in and where to start, and it's really quite simple. It's no matter what size your team is, just start by saying, what are the decisions we need to absolutely make together as a team? And just start writing up proposals and then agree to try them for a certain amount of time. So that's the easy answer. The hard answer that I wanted to bring up, and it's something that I've been working on the past 6 months, is sort of where, because decision making is what moves all organizations forward. So past the process, past creating the systems and the structures and having those sort of plans, you still have a team full of people, and people are full of biases, passions, past traumas in their life, and you're always going to create tension when it comes to decision making in your team, no matter what the size. The smaller it is, the easier it is, but the bigger your team is, the more complex decision making becomes. And some of the work I've been doing recently has been actually in the trauma healing space, and learning about different meditation techniques to sort of process different traumas that we've gone through. And for anyone who thinks that they don't bring their shit to work, you probably bring more than most people. But no, I'm totally serious. I don't mean to make a controversial statement, but we all come from somewhere, and we all have learned patterns of behavior, and we can have all the most amazing technical solutions in the world, but until we look at the shit that we're bringing, the only people we can change is ourselves, and until we start looking at that, we're not going to be able to move our teams forward without jamming solutions through and pushing our own egos into those solutions. So it's something that I'm working on and testing with some teams that I'm working with now, and for myself. And it's actually quite rewarding and interesting, and I'm uncovering a lot. So if anyone wants to talk more about that, I'm open. It's a little bit of a side topic. And then I think, sorry? Cool, let's chat. And then the last theme from Consensys is, I would like to call it just enough structure. So, hey. So, when you're a founder of a team and you're probably, let's take something like hiring, right? You're probably the one who's pretty much in charge of all the hiring decisions, and you say when your organization hits 30 people, then it starts to you become a bottleneck, and you start sort of disseminating the process of hiring, for example. What I've seen is there's sort of a little canyon that happens across a few organizations. Is you have a CEO or founder or group that is in charge of something so critical, like hiring, the people that you bring in your organization, and then they get too stuck, and it's a bottleneck, and then what happens is they kind of drop it over to HR, or they leave the teams to do it themselves, but they don't translate sort of the values and principles around what types of people should we be bringing in, and why, and how do we uphold sort of the whole ethos of what we're trying to do here through our hiring process, like a lot of that gets lost. And I've seen that across organizations. And the solution, I mean, I'd love to hear from you guys what you've seen, but something I'd like to bring up is to think in systems, not just processes. So hiring is just like a tiny piece of a whole system. So it's how you go out and look for the people, right? How you interview them, bring them in, onboard them, how you create a space for them to learn and share with each other, navigate the organization. It's like almost the entire employee experience. Oh, and then at the end, like when they decide to leave, how do you like help them leave in an inviting way? And how do you let go of people? And I've seen a lot of organizations get so stuck in all of these sort of buckets and also see them as like very siloed and not interconnected. So I think looking at the full value flow, but like the people flow through the system from start to finish and how critical that is. So I wanted to bring up topics like hiring and decision making and self-reflection and see if that interests anyone. So round of questions.
From your experience, what have been from your experience, what have been effective mechanisms or experiments that have gone right about overcoming these silos in thinking and these personal issues that come up in the decision-making process?
Sorry, could you repeat the beginning?
In your experience, what have been some different milestones, different measures that you've implemented that have actually experiments that have gone right, things that have actually worked to overcome these silos in thinking and this sort of both in groups and personally in the individual level, which come from maybe traumas and lack of understanding or ignorance around the above?
Yeah, that's a big question. But she asked what sort of experiments have worked in the organization. At xConsensys, we ran some experiments around like the nature of feedback. So feedback is traditionally seen as like, oh, I give what I think about you to you, and this is and then you improve. So changing that, something we did was test different sorts of communication methods to create it rather instead of having like my opinion going to you, to create more of a open communication dialogue. And we've used some structures. I can share them with you, but we found that traditional methods of feedback are not super effective. They create more walls than opening barriers. So we found that to be more effective. And I would say that's a big one. I mean, so instead of saying like, oh, I'm your manager, I'm going to give you feedback, we created things. So something I tested in my team is to create weekly sharings with our team members. So I would have a conversation with you and just be like, hey, this is something I noticed. Like that happened. Like, can you tell me more about it? So I'm not saying like, hey, I saw you do this and this is how I think about it. It's that I bring up something that I wasn't so sure about and I ask you to share. And there's like frameworks and more detailed ways of like going about those conversations, but we tried a lot of new frameworks like that, and had some success. At bigger group levels, that's a little bit harder, but this is more one-on-one.